Viewpoint, the program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Today we're going to have a personality and we're going to have a little perspective. As soon as he climbs off of the railroad and finds his way here, sometimes Elkhart's not easy to get to. And so that means sometimes it's not easy to get out of.
Well,
our guest, Peter Niehaus, will be here shortly. In the meantime, Mrs. Busby and I will sally forth and see if we can let you hang on every word we say. Good morning, Mrs. Busby.
Good morning.
Can I hang on that?
Yes, I have. As you know, my mother was very bright.
Yes, she was.
Yes, she was, bless her heart. And she always said, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. And I would like to share Mom's knowledge with Miss McEvers, who seems to be bad-mouthing Lincoln hither and yon. And therefore, I share with you, ma'am, my mom's wisdom.
Well, all right, that's fine.
My kids would repeat that when they were very little and could hardly speak English. They'd say, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Yes, well, I did read that article, as a matter of fact. Rather interesting. Kind of gave us a little thrust as if we might be the only... and by the way, I admire that young lady, Kelly McEvers. She's made quite a career in this profession of hers in reporting, and has traveled abroad in some very, very serious trouble spots, and I thought that was a little brave of her to do that. The article, the thrust of the article, I guess, if those of you who have not read it or don't know about it, is that we have a real serious heroin problem here in the county, and that may or may not be the case. Certainly none of us are qualified to make judgments on that because we don't know. However, I would just point out that the problem that we might have here is certainly not peculiar to Lincoln Logan County alone.
I mean,
it's endemic, and I am certain that Kelly McEvers did not mean to point out that that was the case. She was talking about her hometown, and in fact, she was lamenting the fact that the area around the square, what we call the downtown, doesn't have the businesses that we used to have. It's what I call the Walmart syndrome. When Walmart goes into a community, ergo the other places kind of follow. And that's not peculiar to Lincoln Logan County. Some people really took umbrage at the article, so I understand. I kind of think it was written with the right motivation, but perhaps a wrong slant. She was lamenting the fact that things have changed, and certainly they have. We do have on the boards, Lord knows it won't happen while I'm around, some nice plans. It takes money to do some nice things down around and I've seen the plans, and many, many others have, and I'm excited about them as a possibility, but it's going to be down the road, folks. If you haven't heard, there's a money problem.
No.
You know, we didn't start with a kudo, Mrs. Busby.
Well, you best do that.
Well, I want to do that because, I've said this ad nausea. We got our athletic teams, and rightfully so. Lord knows they practice hard, and we've got some great coaches. Athletics are a wonderful thing for those who can participate. However, there are any number of youngsters, girls as well as the boys, who are not athletically inclined, but can do other things in their school activities, such as a speech team. And I kind of champion them because that's one of the things that I did when I way back in the Conestoga wagon days, when we had a potbelly stove in the middle of the schoolroom. But in any event, seriously, our speech team was up at Normal over the weekend and acquitted themselves very well, and they've got some other activities coming on down through the academic year. And it takes a lot of practice, by the by, for these youngsters to get ready, get prepared. I remember I was on the debate team, and the subject was, be it resolved that the state of Illinois should have a unicameral unicameral
Oh, yes.
legislation as in Nebraska.
Uh-huh.
And I remember that, my God, that was like the 30s. And
Well,
I still
that-
remember that. You know,
that's-
you
but
have
that-
to go to the library and you do a lot of research, a lot of writing, and,
Oh, sure.
then you consult with your debate coach and all that. So they put a lot of prep in, and good for them.
That unicameral idea comes up right along. I
I think-
remember it was maybe 30 years ago it was a big thing again that they were thinking we should do that. Remember that, James?
No, James can't remember yesterday.
Well, plus he was only 4,
But
I
he
think,
said,
30
the
years
reason
ago.
that for that is he's so doggone busy keeping things glued together here. So
Keeping all the balls in the air, right, Jim?
Right, exactly. Well, also, speaking of school activities, the boys in our football squad, Lord knows we're not a football town. But that doesn't mean that those boys aren't out there practicing hard every day. So we haven't had a winning season, so what? They're out there, they're participating, they're working under good coaches and nice men, and those boys are being taught something besides football. So my hat's off to them.
Always, always. They work awful hard and they wear all that armor that they have to wear in the heat of the summer before the season starts. And, yeah, bless their hearts.
Cat wants to go out and sit on my car again.
I'm working on the door, even as we speak.
Once I saw it go sit on my car again. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the Jeff Foxworthy thing.
Oh, gosh, I'm crazy about him.
Jeff's a funny man, and he has to say about places being run by idiots. If you can get arrested for hunting or fishing without a license, but not for entering and remaining in the country illegally, you might live in a nation that was founded by geniuses but is run by idiots.
Ooh. Well,
Jeff says if you have to have your parents' permission to go on a field trip or take an aspirin in school, but not to get an abortion, you might live in a nation that was founded by geniuses but is run by idiots.
whoa.
Jeff says, if you must show your identification to board an airplane, cash a check, buy liquor, or check out a library book, rent a video, but not to vote for the man who runs the government, you might live in a nation that was founded by geniuses. But run by idiots.
Well, but at the polls, really, in all fairness to ourselves, they really do have checks and balances at the polls.
Well, how come they don't use them?
Well, they do. They do. It's just that they don't.
How come people who are 6 feet beneath the grave, beneath the ground, and lying dead in their graves can vote?
Because they live in Chicago, or they used to. They died in Chicago.
That's somebody wants to talk, and they'll call later. They'll have to find out because I'm not.
I hope it's not our guest calling.
It's our
for
guest calling.
directions.
It's our guest calling me. That's exactly right. So
Well, maybe we won't have a guest today. We just don't know.
We'll work it out.
What
I
did we
think we do know. Everybody knows there are voting irregularities. They steal votes right and left and have for years. I don't know why they can't control that by positive identification. Maybe we ought to go with the fingerprint route.
Maybe you should have to show your voter's card, do you suppose?
Well, don't you do that anyway?
No, you don't have to. You don't have to show that card.
Oh no, but you have to. Well, you're listed in the book. Well, there's the problem. The books that they prepare for the clerks are not valid or bogus
How's that?
by having people in those roles that are dead.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot. You don't have much of that in your precinct, though, do you?
Well, no, as a matter of fact, I think that small towns like we are, and all the towns in our area, are people know one another. There's bound to be 1 out of the 5 at the table who knows somebody that comes through the line.
Well, biggest problem is it's not the bogus voters. It's the people who are qualified to vote that don't get out and vote.
Yeah, well, then to me,
When we're talking
abdicated
20% of the possible voters who show up, and you have to think, well, maybe they don't give a darn.
Well, but they give a darn when all is said and done, and whoever gets in, they have plenty of criticism for. But I think you kind of abdicate your right to gripe if you didn't participate in the choice.
Well, there's a conundrum because they're going to gripe anyway.
Yeah, but if you voted, I don't know. I think that makes your gripe more legitimate. Now that might not be a popular opinion, but it's mine.
Well, you're entitled to opinion here, no question about that. Mr. Orwell says, you remember old George Orwell? He was next door to you for a long time.
1984. Yep.
The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. Well, there's some thought to be said about that. Will Rogers.
Oh, yeah.
Will Rogers said. The Republicans want the man that can lend dignity to the office. Democrats want a man that will lend some money.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he was an equal opportunity basher.
Yeah.
Will was very good. Well, there's a lot of problems with the matter of voting, and the biggest problem is people don't show to vote. And then, as you suggest, then they cry about it, but they were never there to cast their ballot.
What boggles my mind is, well, I don't know what's going on. Oh.
Well, I'll tell you what you do, Jim. I'll tell you, if you're prepared for a commercial break, we'll take that, and I'll contact our guest and tell him that's what he's up to here. Oh, right back here live in the studios. The program is Viewpoint. Our guest is momentarily coming up the hill on his bicycle, I think. We'll find him very quickly. Judith K., we were talking about quotes and so forth. I'm going to pose a question to you. Who said, I wondered what the Ten Commandments would have looked like if Moses had run them through Congress.
Oh, gosh. Oh, dear. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Well, that was Mr. Reagan, for whom they named an aircraft carrier, and was a pretty doggone good president because he knew how to gather people around him who knew what the heck they were doing.
You see, sometimes when you have to pick the people that will be assisting you in your office, no matter what the office is.
That's why I have you here.
Yeah, right. And some pick lesser people to make themselves look better. But in fact, if you pick the best people around, then they think, hey, that guy's brilliant, man. He can surround himself with good people.
Exactly. Well, we're not going to get into that today because I like my job, and the station might take umbrage at some things I might want to say, but we'll just kind of pat that on the rump.
Jim's pretty non-confrontational. I think you can pretty much say what you want to.
Yeah, I think everybody knows that the opinions expressed are usually my own, and not always my own, and never Jim's or the owner or management of the WLCN.
The only thing that you used to have to avoid was a list of like 10 words that you mustn't say on the air, whether it was television or radio. Now it's 4. Well, I didn't know if there was even a list
anymore. There are very few. Whatever they are, there are very few. That has gone. The Hayes office. You're too young to remember the Hayes office, Jim. That was the censorship office when they made movies. And my goodness gracious, it was so strict that if they were showing a couple laying in bed, they had a board between them underneath the cover.
Twin beds.
That was the Hayes office. My goodness, thou shalt not.
Oh, times have changed. They have.
I think Clark Gable changed it when he said, frankly, my dear.
He said, I don't give a damn. Yeah. I think that's a word you can say.
I hope so.
Because I done it anyway.
One would hope so. One would certainly hope so. There been a lot of changes take place in this entertainment industry, and not all of them, most of them are not for the better, or the best, as the case may be. We have youngsters coming home from school, coming into a lot of them, unfortunately, single parents, and they go home, and the other parents working or out somewhere, and the kid goes and trips on the boob tube, and they see things on there that were described as pornographic a long time ago. And it's serious. It's a sad socioeconomic problem because we're raising youngsters, not universally, but a lot of them are seriously impacted by what they see on that thing.
You know, one thing that kind of tickled me that was such a difference, I read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The author was a Swede.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the 3 books in the series, anytime they'd come home from wherever they'd been, or people would stop by or anything, it was always to put on the coffee, to get the coffee, to pour the coffee. And here, it's on television, it's always, would you like a drink?
Mm-hmm.
It's just the difference, I guess, and the Scandinavians are very liberal people, but the books were all about coffee, not about booze.
Well, it's interesting to watch that this change here. Used to be that you'd see them in movies light up their cigarettes and sit down and be very urbane and sophisticated.
Yes.
Now that has gone out the window, happily.
Oh, my.
Speaking of tobacco and such things, I remember when I was in the military, we were allotted so much you could buy. I forgot now, a carton a week or something like that, but quite a bit. And I didn't smoke, so I saved my cigarettes and sent them home to my mother and father, thinking I was doing them a great service. Not knowing, nor did they know, but thinking that I was doing them, and that was very, very common.
Well, in the way back when they used to think that there was some therapeutic value in smoking. Of course, they've changed their mind now. We change our minds about lots of things, don't we?
Well, we've changed our mind in this country about a lot of things. Now, whoops, I'm starting to get on that, so I won't do that.
You can do that. You mustn't. Why are you shy today? You never worry any other day.
I'm worried about my job.
I think you're okay.
Another quote I remember here came up with. I just was going to look around and found it. Old Cal Coolidge, Silent Cal. When he said something, it was usually something worth listening to. And old Cal said, "Patriotism is easy to understand in America. It means looking out for yourself by looking out for your country." There's not a lot of that going on.
Oh, well, they just stop here at the colon and they just observe the first part. Patriotism is easy to understand in America. Looking out for yourself, there is where it ends.
Yes, and not for the country. Or
no.
Or what's in it for me.
Oh,
or give me the free stuff.
You think they care about you, Bill? I'm so sorry. I hate to be the one to tell you, but as your friend, I think you have a right to know that they don't give a toot about you.
Somebody must, because they get a lot of letters asking for money.
Well, at least, may I say this about that? Did you notice, Jim, on Old 66, that where the overpass is with the highway, the humongous chunks of concrete that were out of there that were making me very nervous. I thought someday the overpass is going to be down here. They are fixing that, and we've talked about that, and to people who were in a position to do something about it for how many years?
About 5 years, I think. We had Rick Brower up here, and we reminded him of that. That's a long time, about 4 or 5 years ago. And it took him that long to get around to it. I thought they were going to wash. If you recall, you buy that every day 2 or 3 times, and I was afraid it was going to wash out that I-55 bridge there.
Yeah. But it's fixed.
For now, anyway.
What's that old saying? The wheels of government move exceedingly slow. Is that it? I think that's it.
I'm worried about the fact that Mr. Niehaus might be up in Dixon, Illinois, somewhere by now. But anyway, speaking of Dixon, Ron Reagan came from up around that area, and Eureka and Dixon and all. And old Ron's, first Ron I found this, and Ronnie said, you can't be for big government, big taxes, and big bureaucracy, and still be for the little guy.
Oh.
Well, there's a lot of little guys out here that are getting trampled.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Have you signed on for the Obamacare health care?
Well,
Have you tried that yet?
This is one time that it doesn't seem to matter. that I'm technologically impaired, because I guess even if I were you, Bill, I couldn't get to it. And they said the end of the month is maybe a little, the end of this month is maybe a little soon to think that it'll be running smoothly. But
Pigs.
now they're talking
Pigs
about...
will fly before they get that thing going.
Now the issue seems to be, do you in fact get to keep your health care? But if your health care is going to double, triple, quadruple, as far as the payments are concerned, you know, to keep it isn't anybody's issue.
You can keep your health care. You don't have to change. Now, the man who is in charge said that.
I know that.
No, do you believe that?
Well, that's what they're talking about now, that maybe we should, since he already promised that we should put that in force.
Promised a
you
lot
see.
of things, too, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the gentleman of the hour has just approached here, and we'll now talk. Mr. Niehaus has just arrived, and good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Bill.
We're here to talk about Elkhart.
Oh, good.
And what's going on in Elkhart that's important, but then also, primarily, we've had Mr. Niehaus come aboard because Peter comes from a huge continent, the continent of Africa. How many years ago?
15 years ago.
15?
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's
I was
not
amazed.
so many.
I just saw recently that they showed the continent of Africa, and then they overlaid the size of countries such as the U.S. and China and many, many others. They all fit within the configuration of the continent of Africa. That's how big it is. I was amazed.
Yeah, it is a fascinating thing, but people think of Africa as a small place, but essentially it's about 5,000 miles long from tip to toe, and probably 3,500 at its broadest part across the north part of Africa. So it's a pretty big place.
And speaking of tip to toe, your home was in the toe.
In the toe, in Cape
It
Town, South
certainly
Africa.
was. And you
Beautiful down there. I was amazed. I saw those pictures that Peter showed at this little seminar we had down in Elkhart at the Wild Hare. By the way, they have some nice little programs from time to time down there. You do a great job, Peter, and you and Andrea do a great job of serving the folks, and it's really a nice evenings when you have those. He did the seminar in South Africa with a lot of pictures. I was amazed at how pretty that is. You know, you think of Africa, normally you think you're looking for the wildebeest and the giraffes and the zebras and so forth. Boy, this is none of that down there.
Well, it's an interesting concept, because when I was originally setting the program together, I thought I should give a dusty track with some thatched huts on the side, and so a couple of lines wandering across the road, because I think that's the impression of most people have of Africa. But in Cape Town, South Africa, and certainly that southern part of Africa, it's a very cosmopolitan city. It has many millions of people who are permanent residents, well-to-do people. Climate is superb. It is like Southern California, Mediterranean style climate. Hence the reason why we have such a good wine industry down there, because the climate actually suits it. It's pretty far to go if you have to go from America, because you've got to go via Europe. So you've got to go to Europe and then down Africa. It's a 32-hour trip with an 8-hour stopover in Europe to get a connecting flight.
Is that right? I'm just thinking here out loud, you couldn't go down and say to Buenos Aires and then fly across from there to...
Well, by the time
I'm
you've
just
done
thinking,
that-
I'm trying to look on the latitudes. I'm trying to visualize that.
Okay, it's around 30 degrees south latitude, so therefore it would be about Buenos Aires. However, there are which would mean that you'd have to go down to somewhere like Florida, catch a flight to Buenos Aires, and from Buenos Aires across to Africa. And that's really not a very good way of traveling. We used
It
to
is
be,
not.
and no, in the old days we used to be able to go from Florida, from Miami, straight to Cape Town, and that was a 17-hour trip, non-stop, with no stopovers. So you woke up and got on in the morning or at night, and you wake up the next day, one day ahead or one day behind, depending on which way you would be going.
Well, I was amazed at the size of Cape Town, and you say it's very, obviously it's a very sophisticated city, and apparently there's a lot of money down there.
Yes.
And what is the economy? What generates that kind of money?
Well, Cape Town has a huge industry base as well as a farming base. First of all, you got the wine industry is basically centered around the Western Cape, which has its headquarters, Cape Town. But you've also got to remember that it's at the tip of a very important ocean route for ships.
Yeah.
Approximately 200 to 300 ships pass Cape Town every single day. So you've got a huge repair industry and also a replenishment area, which is what the reason why Cape Town was established in the first place by the Dutch in the 1600s, to replenish or to resupply sailing ships going to the Far East for the Dutch East India Company.
Peter, tell us how you got to South Africa. Let's take Peter Niehaus up in Europe and Holland. Was it Holland?
That is correct.
And then how did you get down to South Africa?
Well, after the war, my father decided, I was born on a dairy farm in the south of Holland, about as far south as you can go on the German Luxembourg borders. There was not very much future in the country post-war. Everything, the industry, everything had basically been destroyed after the war. And my father he was an engineer, had a very good offer to actually travel or to immigrate to South Africa. So in the late 50s, when I was about 15, he decided that our family should go to Africa, and that's how we ended up in South Africa. South Africa at that stage was looking for many engineers and things like that, because it was at that stage a very fast developing country. It has a very good industry in all aspects of engineering. One of the main things they do is, or one of the most interesting things to do is they do not have any oil down there. So they actually manufacture oil and gasoline and dieseline from coal.
Oh.
And it's a place called Sasolburg. There are 2 refineries, and they actually turn coal into oil. It's quite an enterprising thing. It's the only place in the world where it has been done, and it's been done very successfully. In fact, so much so that South Africa could probably supply itself with oil just from the 2 factories that exist, Sasol 1 and Sasol 2.
Is that right? Yeah.
Which stands for South African Oil Company.
Peter, did your parents talk much about living in Holland under the Nazi occupation?
Yeah, not that much, but my dad, he was the leader of the resistance in the south of Holland, and he had a prize of 40,000 marks on his head, and they actually caught him. In that stage, the Germans were collecting hard labor prisoners, basically to do work on projects that they had on the defending line of Germany. This is in the latter part of the war. He was captured and taken to Germany. He escaped and walked back home. That's not such a vast distance if you think about where I come from, which is a town near Maastricht, which is the Euro capital of Europe.
Yes, I know where it is.
And Cologne, which is the industrial area, the Ruhr as it was called,
Yes.
which the Americans and English bombed continuously, and so it was probably a distance of no more than 60 or 80 kilometers. However, in the wartime conditions, it would have been extremely difficult to walk home that distance. He did, however, do that. And he spent the rest of the war in hiding, although he's still running the resistance movement.
And then at a later time, then you went down to South Africa. And how old were you when you went to South Africa?
I was 15.
Yeah. And
Well, you'd remember well then living in Holland, too.
Oh, yes, surely.
Sure.
I remember on the dairy farm at home, yes. That's where we lived, with my grandfather and grandmother, who had subsequently died. And my father was not a farmer. He liked engineering, did not like farming. So he had this fantastic opportunity to travel South Africa. So, that's what he did. He immigrated with the whole family.
now let's get back to the geography of Cape Town. As I recall in the slides that you showed, you back up to mountains pretty quickly there. Is that correct?
Sure. The coastal plain is approximately 30 miles, no more. And then immediately you get a ridge of blue granite mountains, which are anything up to 3,500 to 4,000 feet. In fact, Table Mountain, which is the mountain that is Cape Town is associated with, is 3,600 feet high. And it looks like a table because looks as though somebody cut it off with a knife. But it's not quite that flat, but from a distance it certainly looks like that. And one of the reasons why the wine industry is so great is the foot slopes of that. The soil is very fertile. It acts as if anybody knowing anything about rainfall, the rain shadow, the rain would fall before climbing over the mountain. So that is a very fertile area, and that's where the whole wine culture of the country grew up in.
And that wine is exported all over.
All over the world. South African wines are famous. If anybody does any research on it, you'll find that South African wines win many, many, many awards all over the world.
I find that in Judy's table all the time.
Yes, I can understand that.
No, seriously. Then what other exports would come out of South Africa?
South Africa has very few deep harbor ports. It is a very hostile coast on the west. There are no ports on the west with the exception of Saldanha Bay, which is a natural area, and that from there a lot of iron ore is exported to all over the world. There are huge iron ore fields in the northwestern Cape. It's brought by train to the deep sea harbor at Saldanha Bay, where giant ore carriers of up to 400,000 tons come in and actually collect the ore and go to the Far East and any place that requires iron ore.
Now, Johannesburg, that's north of you there, and north or east? West
well,
or
it's
east?
due north. Due north.
Yeah, due north.
Due north, yes.
Now, is that where the diamond mines are?
No, there are no diamond mines in South Africa. The only diamond mine in South Africa was, in fact, in Kimberley.
Oh.
That's the only place where they actually mine diamonds out of the ground. South Africa's diamond wealth comes from the seashore on the northwestern side of the Western Cape. The river brings an old river that doesn't exist anymore, brought those diamonds down in its in its annual floods and deposited them on the seashore. So the diamond industry actually is centered on the beaches and the water off the west coast, which where they dredge up the sand and then put it through filters, and then that's how they recover the diamonds. And the other way they do it is to actually, between low and high tide, they remove large quantities of sand with huge caterpillar tractors and graders, and send in a labor force with dustpans and hand brooms and actually sweep the diamonds out of the crevices. And this is not an exaggeration.
Oh my.
The recovery, I think, is something like 10 tons of diamonds a day. It's as high as that. And you must remember that the industrial diamond is what people are after. You know, jewelry uses probably 0.1% of the diamonds in the world. The rest of it's all used for industrial purposes.
So because the stone is so hard, they use
That
it
is it, correct.
industrially.
They use it for bearings and all sorts of things, spaceships and space probes and things like that, because there is virtually nothing that can destroy a diamond except a diamond. So if you have a bearing made of diamond, it lasts forever. Like the Hubble telescopes and things like that would have bearings in them that were made of diamonds because they're so immensely hard and functional.
Aren't there also huge, like cattle ranches in South Africa?
Oh, yes. Well, South Africa is famous also for its sheep.
Sheep?
The merino sheep, which in fact was exported to Australia many years ago, it produces the best wool and meat of all the sheep or mutton in the world, you know. And South Africa is the world's second biggest producer of wool still today, Australia being the first. But the sheep that were cultivated in South Africa for those extremely dry conditions were in fact exported to Australia by the British during the days when they were ruling the Cape, and then also Australia, and that's how the wool industry started in Australia. But there were merino sheep come from South Africa. A ram would fetch about $50,000 to $100,000.
Oh my!
A sheep, you know.
Oh,
so
boy.
it's quite a big industry. The inner part, as soon as you climb over the mountains in the south, and that's the area we're talking about now, is basically it becomes relatively dry. It's what we call the Karoo, Karoo, and the bush that the sheep feed on is called what you would call a keki bos, or we would call a khaki bos.
Okay.
And that is where the word khaki comes from, because that's what the Boers wore in the fight against the British.
Yeah.
And the British would turn out in beautiful, like they were called the redcoats, if you remember. They wore these beautiful battle uniforms, and the Boers would be lying in wait for them with khaki on, blending in with the field. They were expert marksmen because they were hunters and gatherers. So, boy, they were good targets, boys with the redcoats.
Go ahead.
What about the government of South Africa? How is using ours as the other side of the coin? How would it compare with ours?
Well, it is a democracy. It wasn't always a democracy. The whites, for many years, ran the country with giving no votes to the black people of South Africa at all. That did cause, during the periods of apartheid, as you know
Yes,
about them.
yes.
Okay, so that did create tremendous problems. But in fact, even before the changes that came about, there were immense changes. My children, for instance, went to school with black and brown and green and orange children. And why I say that is because we were supposed to be known as the Rainbow Nation. And there are all those colors in South Africa, because we have Chinese and we have people from the Far East, we have Japanese, we have the brown people from South Africa, which we call coloreds, which is a mixture of black and white, and also the black people plus the white people.
Now, do you have much of a Muslim influence in South Africa?
Yes, there is a very strong Muslim population. It's not as strong as one would anticipate, but I would think that you would have, I think the last census I remember was like 40 million people in South Africa, 4 million of them being white, 2 or 3 million of them would be other colors, and then the rest would be black. So the vast majority is black. And South Africa, I have to say this and without offending anybody, in as much as this is, it is a true democracy, because every man's vote does actually count. In other words, it is a one man, one vote organization. Whereas in this country, because of the electoral college, each personal vote does not count.
Yeah.
You have large areas which could come together, and that would be one vote or 2 votes or 3 votes. Whereas in South Africa, it is one man, one vote.
So
sounds like a plan to me.
Yeah, really, you stop short then of the electoral college, is so that
We do not have an electoral college.
You just-
Everybody's
right.
vote counts. In other words,
Yes.
if there are 50 million people, 50 million votes count. Whereas
Right.
in this country, New York City would have like 10 votes, and one guy in Texas would have 10 votes.
Yeah,
One guy in Texas would have 1 vote.
yeah.
So I'm not quite sure how that all comes together, but that's
Well,
what
it's
the
not done
electoral
very
college
well,
does.
thank you very much, the way things are going right now.
Well, I'm not going to get into that. But it would be a true reflection, I think, and this is a personal opinion. It's not opinion of the station or anybody else. It's my personal opinion that if everybody got one man, one vote, you might have a different concept on the whole thing.
Yes, I agree.
And that's all I can say about that.
Now you're quitting that conversation.
Andrea
huh?
said, "Now, say him up here now. Don't go get yourself in trouble." That's why I can hear her saying that. Okay, Peter, let's jump to how you emigrated to this country and how you found the little village of Elkhart, where we've had an impact.
I lived in Africa for 40 years. And I met my wife, Andrea, who's an American. She was in South Africa, had been married to somebody else before, and I met her, and we decided to get married and lived in South Africa for a number of years before she decided that she wanted to come home to America. She'd been there for 27 years, and
Really?
felt that she wanted to come home to South Africa, to America rather, sorry. And the reason why we settled on Elkhart, well, not Elkhart as much as the Lincoln area, because we have a place out in the country. We do not live in the city of Lincoln. We live west of Lincoln. I have a small holding of 10 acres out there. And my sister-in-law, Andrea's sister, she had done her fine arts degree at the University of Western University in
Macomb.
Macomb. That's right, in Macomb. So she had settled here, and when we came to visit in '96, Andrea said it would be nice to come home and be with my sister, because she hadn't been with her for a long time. So we came and we found a place very close to her, out west of Lincoln, and they lived out west of Lincoln, and so we bought a small holding out there, 10 acres, pretty nice land. It's not, it was never grazed. It was grazed. In fact, it was cattle land belonging to the Beaver family, Paul Beaver's family.
Yes.
And that's where we bought a bit of land. It was already divided, but it was already Paul Beaver's great-great-grandfather's land, which we bought a piece of, and it has beautiful oak trees and things on it, so it's not just an open field. And we were very comfortable there. And we had stores in Africa called, believe it or not, Martha's Vineyard.
Is that
And we
right?
had 5 stores in Africa, which were very similar to this. We never dabbled in the restaurant business. We always were just on the gifts and antique side. When we got here, when she looked at the building and said, "I'd like that building," and I said, "Okay." So I bought the building for her in 2003, and restored the building for a year because it was pretty run down. And in 2004 we opened the Horsefeathers, which is in fact a gift and antique store. And then in 2007 we actually added the restaurant. It's still in part of the original building. We did add on a kitchen, and we are at the present expanding that kitchen to be able to cater better for our customers.
How in the world did you go from being a craftsman in the building trade to being a chef? That's quite a leap.
It's
pretty good at both, by the by.
Pretty good food?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting thing is this. I'm actually neither. I'm actually a mechanical engineer by profession. Okay. I have always had an affinity for wood. And many years ago, even in Africa, I was already doing a lot of restoration work. That's what I specialize in. I've always done restoration, and it's far more than modern construction. I like the ins and outs of all the woodcraft, and I have a workshop at home which is about 4,000 square feet, in which I manufacture all those bits and pieces that nobody makes anymore. So, just to give you an example, I needed some molding for Bob Neal's house, and I went to Alexander and I said, "Can you get me a molding like this?" And the guy behind the counter said, "No, but I know the guy who can make it," and his name was Peter Niehaus. So there I was, back in my own thing. I just thought maybe I could short-circuit it, but I didn't. I had to actually make it, which is fine, you know.
Well, that was probably pleasant for you.
And then I've always had a good feeling about food. My mother was a
I noted
chef.
that.
Yeah, noticed that. Okay. My mother was an excellent chef, and we all learned to do kind of everything. And I was always some or other in the kitchen with her, and so I spent a lot of time working with her in the kitchen, and that's what I learned. And I'm not scared to experiment. You know, I'm quite comfortable taking a recipe and take it apart or add things to it, which makes a big difference, I suppose. You know, they always say the essence of a true chef is a guy who can modify a recipe that belongs to somebody else. So, but you know, as you know, the food that we create at Elkhart is everything is homemade. We do not buy anything ready-made, and I know that you have had some wonderful meals there. So, you know, and recently, as you know, we did this whole South African cuisine thing tied in with this whole South African lecture that was given to the Elkhart Historical Society.
Well, but as we close, and the old clock on the wall says we have to do that, one of the things that Judy and I talked about this before, in this area we have some close-knit communities that do a lot of nice things, Elkhart being one of them. You have a group down there that they're just behind the community, and everybody pulls together, and you put on some nice things down there, and that's, of course, that's small. That's a slice of Americana. Well, that's what makes us work, is our good old Elkharts and our Mount Plaskies and so forth that do those things. So,
well, the interesting thing about it, of course, is you probably know that I am the chairman of the Elkhart Historical Society, and have been for about 5 years. And we do produce regular lectures on mostly on a historical aspect of Elkhart, but we've broadened out into doing just basically good lectures on any subject that we can find. And I was asked to do one on the sort of South Africa, and I started thinking about, well, first of all, Africa, and I thought, I cannot do Africa in a single lecture, it's too big. So I decided...
And too diverse.
Yeah, that's right. So we decided to start off in the bottom, okay? And our following lecture will, in fact, be the animals of Africa, which I'm busy putting a PowerPoint together for now. So we will do that. And again, we will put some South African food and African food into that for that evening lecture.
Well, they're fun. They're fun events, and I commend attendance by those. And you have limited, so when you put these programs on, people need to be aware of it and get their reservations in, because you only have so much seating room in that quaint little place you have. Peter, we appreciate your fact you made a special effort to come up here. I'm sorry that the sheep crossing the road stopped you from getting up on time, but that's kind of the way it
was. Well, the train
was.
stopped me too. I ended up held up by a 100-car train.
we always close with a quote that tries to pertain to the subject matter, and I found one about Africa and safaris. And W.C. Fields said that when he went on, it reminds me when I went on a safari, some idiot forgot the corkscrew, and for a long time we had nothing but food and water. Thank you for Viewpoint.
Thank you very much.